Hi, Dennis Weiss. Welcome to Why Like Ike. We're in the Eisenhower Presidential Library building today, which is also the museum for 2018 pretty much. Great temporary exhibit upstairs, went through it the other day. So we always have good things here. But we have a show for you today about Eisenhower and Korea. We have Pam Sanfilippo in the middle. We have Troy Elkins over there. They're sharing a microphone. And we have some stuff on the table that I get to put my white glove hands on in a little while. But Pam's going to start us off. Ike and Korea.
Well, Ike's involvement started, the big involvement started with his campaign for president in the fall of 1952. And at a speech in Detroit, Michigan, he announced that if elected, he would go to Korea in an effort to try and resolve the Korean conflict.
And resolving the Korean conflict, what conflict was being unresolved at that time?
Well, the war had started in 1950, and Truman was trying to stop Soviet communist aggression in the South, and wasn't real successful. The war was dragging on. People were tired of war, tired of the lives lost, of course, and the money being spent.
So, you know, as we're going to move forward from that point, but some background for the camera and the people watching. They may not all be Ike and history fans that we are. So, you know, World War II, Eisenhower, we know about Ike Eisenhower, World War II. This is the period of time of which the world changed from a hot war to a cooler than cold war. And this is the pivot point. This is one of the pivot points in the world, Korea. It's one of the fulcrums. So both the Chinese and the Soviets had interest in that part of the world.
Correct.
And were exhibiting their interest in controlling it. We had great concerns in this country, and in what became the NATO countries, we had great concern about that. And our efforts focused in Korea were aimed at being the wall between the free world and communism.
Correct.
Pretty straightforward. It's a lot more interesting than that if you have time to sit down and talk to experts like these guys, but that's the Dennis Weiss explanation of it.
Well,
but into that steps Eisenhower.
correct.
Because he's running for president. He's no longer a general. He's been talked into running for political office, and much to Truman's regret, he runs as a Republican.
Yes, and that kind of starts the break between the two. And Truman, of course, supports the Democratic candidate, Adlai Stevenson, and does some attacks on Eisenhower, which Ike takes personally, of course, and so then Ike kind of ramps up his campaign, and this speech in Detroit he kind of goes through some of that history that you've shared, and then says, okay, we need a new administration to change things, and he doesn't say, here's what I will do, other than I will go to Korea, but pretty much says a new administration, and then proceeds to say that it's, you know, if it's him, this is what he's going to do. So,
you know, there are people watching, I know, and there are people sitting who have some connectivity to the Korean conflict. And I do, through Elizabeth, her father and uncle were in the Korean conflict, and there will be people with the same experience right there. So the Korean conflict's a little closer to today than World War II. We're going to have more people who have been involved. We're talking about a geopolitical Cold War, but Korea was a physically cold war.
One of the coldest that U.S. forces had encountered, especially in the fall of 1950, November, when the Chinese forces did step in and start participating in the war, counterattacking and driving the United Nations forces south, encircling them at Chosin Reservoir and almost almost wiping out a whole army, and the
Yeah.
U.S. was able to fight their way back, but in sub-freezing conditions to the point where weapons weren't functioning, and if you got a hole in your sleeping bag, you were probably going to freeze to death that night.
Do you remember the unit number that was at Chosin Reservoir? I don't.
It's, I know the 1st Marine Division was there.
Okay.
That's
That was a primary holder, right?
yeah, that was one of them, and they, to the chagrin of the Army, once again they started pulling the press and everything. The 8th Cavalry was also one of the units, I believe, the 8th Cavalry, and
I believe the 1st Marines had the responsibility of the reservoir, and after they were surrounded, I think Army units started coming in to help from all over. But I think you're right. I think it was the 1st Marines that were in the center of that fight. Okay, freezing cold. Our cold weather gear coming out of World War II did not stand up to the Korean Peninsula.
no, it did not. It was not really, for the most part, the U.S. had not encountered a cold that bad before on such a level. And supply lines, and fast as the war is moving at this point in time, that they just couldn't keep up with getting the proper cold weather equipment up to them as well.
So you and I might be content to sit here for 25 minutes and talk about the I's and the T's of the battle around Chosin Reservoir, but you've said something I want to say again to the camera. That is the focus point of when the Chinese moved south. The regular army from China moved south into Korea rapidly and encircled the 1st Marine Division. So geopolitically, that's when China entered the war in a big, big way. So we had American Army fighting North Koreans and now fighting the Chinese.
Well, and it wasn't just the American Army, it was the United Nations Army. The United States had, at the outset of the Korean conflict, gone to the United Nations and to the Security Council and pulled a vote which the Soviet Union abstained from, which allowed the United Nations to step in as the peacekeeping force and try to stop the North Korean aggression, is the way it was viewed at the start of the war. So this is going to be one of the few times where the United Nations, actually Security Council, steps into a hot war as a fighting force. And you had Australians, you had New Zealand, you had Republic of Korean Army fighting there. It was a coalition force, Greeks, Turks, you had pretty much anybody that was considered a free force in the world at the time stepped into this battle.
So can I ask you to do something while Troy holds the microphone for you? I'm reading over your shoulder here. From about right here where it says it has been a sign, a warning sign. Would you read down to the end of this paragraph? These are Eisenhower's words from the speech. Powerful.
And that's one thing I was going to mention, is that he does in his speech, it is a campaign speech, so of course he's stressing that part of it, and he's kind of recounting what's happened up to this point. And he's talking about this tragedy is Korea, all these things it has been, and it has been the burial ground for 20,000 American dead. It has been another historic field of honor for the valor and skill and tenacity of American soldiers. So he does want to stress that it is the valor of the soldiers. He's going to defend them to at all times. And yet one thing more, he says, it has been a symbol, a telling symbol of the foreign policy of our nation. It has been a sign, a warning sign of the way the administration has conducted our world affairs. It has been a measure, a damning measure, of the quality of leadership we have been given. So, and then he continues, tonight I'm going to talk about our foreign policy and of its supreme symbol, the Korean War. I'm not going to give you elaborate generalizations, but hard, tough facts. I'm going to state the unvarnished truth. And then he goes on from there.
I think that's just classic Eisenhower. I mean, not only was that who he was as a person, but that's the way he spoke to the facts. And he goes on to enumerate them.
Exactly.
Would you read that following paragraph?
Sure. The biggest fact about the Korean War is this: it was never inevitable, it was never inescapable. No fantastic fiat of history decreed that little South Korea in the summer of 1950 would fatally tempt communist aggressors as their easiest victim. No demonic destiny decreed that America had to be bled this way in order to keep South Korea free and to keep freedom itself self-respecting.
Again, Eisenhower never varied far from the word freedom and his defense of it in all of his life. But this speech is just, yes, it's a campaign speech, but it's still a factual speech of who the man was. Dwight David Eisenhower didn't change when he ran for office. He was Dwight David Eisenhower from the time he was over here in the little house in Abilene to the time he was buried in the Memorial Chapel in Abilene. Still Dwight David Eisenhower. Very clearly identifiable with what he thought and how he lived.
Right, and about half of the speech does go through kind of this history of what's gone on, and then finally he gets to, let's see if I can, then he gets to his plan is, my answer, candid and complete, is this: the first task of a new administration will be to review and re-examine every course of action open to us with one goal in view, to bring the Korean War to an early and honorable end. This is my pledge to the American people. And then he goes on to his second pledge, I shall go to Korea. His third pledge is, we must carefully weigh all interrelated courses of action. We will, of course, constantly confer with associated free nations of Asia and with the cooperating members of the United Nations. So getting back to that cooperative effort. Thus, we could bring into a practical plan for world peace. That's his third pledge. And his fourth pledge, I will always reject appeasement.
Students who get to come here their sophomore year, they get to see a lot of material. We could bring students from every high school in America and not run out of material that Dwight David Eisenhower has left with us to be able to help people understand what leadership is. It's a treasure trove that we cannot see the bottom of.
That's
Yeah. Okay.
definite.
All right, so serious enough for a while. I'm going to play with stuff, Troy.
Okay.
What have I got?
That's a cigarette lighter that was given to Eisenhower on his visit to Korea by the 2nd Infantry Division.
I'm going to move it, Dave. To President-elect Dwight David Eisenhower, hand-carved, from 2nd Infantry Division, Korea, 1952. My dad brought these home from World War II. Every soldier brought carved lighters home from World War II. Such a fantastic thing. So I'm not going to flip it open because it's an archive piece. I can remember the smell of the lighter fluid, the ignition, and the cigarette. I know cigarettes are bad, but as a young person, for me, that gave me an instant, complete psychological, sensal understanding of my dad in war. And it still does. I see someone using it today, I go right back there.
Do we know, was that presented to him when he went to Korea
That
in
was
November?
when he went
52.
in November, yes.
Yeah, very cool. So handed to him out of a line with one of these, I suppose.
More than likely.
Yeah,
That's-
yeah. Are a lot of photographs of Eisenhower talking to soldiers. I imagine we could find some on this trip.
Yes, there are. There's one of the more iconic ones is him sitting down in cold weather gear, eating dinner with some of the troops.
Yeah.
And it's not no ranking or anything on his uniform.
Right.
He's wearing an Army uniform. There's no rank on it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just sitting down with the enlisted and having the same food and basically sitting in a rocky outcrop out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And
Explains Korea. 65-year anniversary of the armistice was no ending of the
Yeah.
war with the cessation of hostilities.
it's the 65th anniversary is going to be July 27th.
Okay?
And if you look, that pen right there in front of you, that was the pen used by General Mark Clark to sign the armistice.
Korea 53. The pen?
The pen.
Wow. I am the luckiest guy you've ever seen on camera. I get to come here and they let me hold this stuff after going through several security classifications and training by the staff, I assure you.
This was delivered to Ike at the start of August, and
Wow.
he, shortly after receiving the pen, was able to give his speech on his views of the armistice.
So I got to tell you a story. The program we did over in the museum, just with all the weapons of World
Yes.
War II, when we posted it on our website, I sent it to my son as a link, and a couple of days went by, and I said, "So, son, have you watched that program?" He said, "No, and I'm not going to." I said, "Why would you not want to watch that program?" He said, "Dad, I just can't really express how mad I am at you that you get to go do these things and I don't." I go, "That's a choice, son. You could do it. You just got to go through the training, get the white gloves, and hold the microphone." So I may send him one of these days just to prove that to be true. Okay, so back to Korea. Mark Clark signed the armistice with that pen, and in the last month, our current president went face to face with the leader of North Korea. Our CIA chief has negotiated with the leader of North Korea, and Korean Peninsula remains relevant to the freedom of the world today. Anyone interested can come here, reserve time at the research room, and write that book. That's part of what we do here. And right now, the archives are putting materials in front of us that help us understand that, and our camera is giving them a chance at home to see these things, to get some context. That's an important completion of the mission for Dwight David Eisenhower, and him putting his museum library here in Abilene, Kansas. So very cool.
So obviously Eisenhower was elected.
Pull that up, Mike. You gotta, hey, I'm gonna take your gloves away if you don't work that microphone.
Eisenhower was elected in November of 1952, went
Okay.
on, and the end of the month went over and visited Korea for a few days, and pretty much came to the conclusion that we were not going to be able to take Korea, one battle at a time, and then proceeded to work toward the armistice. In the meantime, before that was accomplished in July of 1953, Stalin died, which historians-
Before we change to such an important topic,
Yes.
I want to remind the viewer at home, they just heard you say he was elected in November.
correct,
He visited Korea in November.
yes, 3 weeks after.
Not much wasted time for
No.
Dwight David Eisenhower to complete his promise to the American people. I will go to Korea.
Correct.
Yep.
All right, and obviously then inaugurated in January and began working toward that armistice. He did do some polling of the public about some items that we have in our collection that shows kind of what people were thinking in
Okay.
April and May of 1953. So while he's working to achieve the armistice, and pretty much everybody
Read that
is-
question. That's
Sure.
too cool to not read.
So the first question was, do you think we will be able to reach a satisfactory agreement with the communists in the next month or so to stop the fighting in Korea? In April, about 34% said yes, they thought there would be an agreement fairly soon. In May, it went in half, 17% said yes.
Yeah.
74% said no. Little did they know that Ike was working toward that goal. If the second question was, if we do get a truce in Korea along the present battle line, would it seem to you that we had generally succeeded or generally failed in our main purpose in going into Korea? 45% said generally succeeded.
You just don't hear polling questions written like that today.
No.
That is a conversational writing of a question, just like if he was speaking to someone on the street. So I'm sure well, I'm not sure that Eisenhower wrote it or didn't write it, but these
I
are
don't-
questions from his administration. I just
Correct.
want to point out to the camera, the reason I had you read that, it's conversational.
Mm-hmm.
Those were still the times where we had government speaking to people, with people, not at
Mm-hmm.
people.
So, let's see, 70 to 100% did testify that they had great confidence in President Eisenhower's handling of foreign affairs. So
Yeah.
that was not surprising for those of us who,
It's always, I love to just come sit around here or anyplace else and talk to you guys about Ike and the Korean War. But coming here and doing this for a while, Like Ike program means we have the luxury of you being the fact expert on what was done and what was said. We have the luxury of Troy bringing in the toys for to me to play with, and I have resisted the urge to ask for that beautiful broom handle over there, but he's going to hand it to me
Yeah.
while I keep my finger in a very safe position here. Tell me about the artifact. We're down under 2 minutes, Troy.
This is a Mauser C96, also known as a broom handle.
It certainly
is.
is.
A weapon most notably known for World War I use, and it was a gift given to President Eisenhower from the commanding general of the 20th Infantry Division for the Republic of Korea. And it was captured
Oh,
on the
really?
Battle of M1 Hill in
Oh.
July of 1953.
We've
So-
had this artifact before.
Yes, we have.
Yeah.
So when even towards the armistice being signed, the fighting, and there's actually records showing that the casualty rate increased in the last few weeks prior to the armistice being signed because they were trying to gain a little bit of land and solidify lines. This Battle of M1 Hill is in the Haeungu district, which is also known for the battle, the Punch Bowl battle, Battle of Heartbreak Ridge, and a few others. So it's was a very contested region. And
Dave, see if you can get a close-up of this while I'm holding it. If you can't, we'll take a picture of it because there's Korean writing on both grips of this German pistol.
that was captured from the Chinese forces.
Yeah, okay. I have an idea for a program that we can get my son involved in, Troy. The way that over-engineering lost the war for the Germans. We're holding an example of that. So, but that's a great topic that would interest the people like you and me out there in cameraland world.
Definitely.
Okay, all right, so I know we're out of time, so we'll wrap this thing up. It always goes by really too fast when we're talking about Dwight David Eisenhower. Today's topic was Korea, so relevant in today's news, just go look it up. It's on at least 3 of the national websites today. Eisenhower had a lot to say about Korea, and his words that Pam read to us are so relevant and poignant today. Had a great time. Thanks for letting me come in once more.
Thank you.
All right, Pam Sanfilippo, Troy Elkins. I'm Dennis Weiss, I work for Eagle Communications. We wish you a great day.